Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Aron, how are you this afternoon?
Hello. So happy to be with you today, Ted. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day. I know you're a busy guy to have this chat. You and I got connected. You had made some comments on LinkedIn about Agentic AI, which is all the rage right now and the topic du jour. So especially with recent developments like Claude's new release, but we'll get into that. Before we do, just want to tee you up for an introduction here. So you were a computer science undergrad, and I read in one of your posts that you didn't feel sufficiently challenged, so you decided to enter the PhD program in applied math. And I was a math major undergrad, and it was very humbling during I thought I was good at math until advanced calculus, and I started to have to write proofs, and that's when things got real, so to speak. But so you also were in financial services for a little while, and now you're at Relativity. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you do it?
Yeah, it all starts from the beginning. I grew up in Hawaii. I spent 18 years. I went to high school there. I think starting in such a, like, say, small town, 100,000 people, my mom was a plaintiff's attorney. And she was one of those plaintiffs' attorney that I think you don't hear these stories. So she worked mostly in personal injury, some other types of work in that line, and then she got into some really large cases towards the end of her career, and she got into a bet the farm case, and she bet the farm and she lost, and I think that this case happened well over 2 decades ago. I think that she would still tell you that she felt that she was in the right. She felt that she didn't do her client justice, that she didn't get to all the things that needed to happen, and the truth didn't come out. So I don't think it's a complete accident that 20 years later in my own career, I work in discovery. I work in improving access to the justice system, and I make things faster. But of course, there was a long journey between there and now. So as you said, I did an undergraduate degree at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, and I studied computer engineering, and it was challenging, but not that challenging. And so I thought I was going to do something more challenging. And so I went and did a PhD in applied math at Columbia University, and that was maybe too challenging, but it was still fun, and I did manage to survive it. Um, I, I did struggle a little with proofs. I also struggled, funnily enough, with multidimensional analysis, multidimensional, even starting from calculus and then going on into partial differential equations. I was always pretty good with one dimension, and then as soon as I got to two or three, things started to get really hard. But then, funny enough, my thesis was about very, very high dimensions and doing optimization in 20-dimensional or more spaces. And so you never know what you're going to end up working on based on where you start. I spent some time abroad. I actually spent 4 years abroad, 3 years in Saudi Arabia, working in the first co-ed university in the country or in the kingdom, and then a year at Oxford University while my wife was pursuing her MBA. I sort of danced around and did a bunch of things. Came back to the U.S. I've actually worked in a variety of jobs. So before I was at Capital One, I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. I studied storm surge, hurricanes, flooding, some military applications as well. From there, I pivoted more into large-scale data analysis. I worked on both two DARPA programs, including MEMX, and it's sort of a real focus on large-scale search and sort of taking advantage of all the information on the dark web and maybe using that to connect to something like the Silk Road 2 downloads and identifying criminals and weapons and other types of trafficking in the U.S. And somehow from there, I went straight into financial services. You might think that there's no connection between a company like Capital One and identifying criminals on the dark web, but a bank like Capital One will deal with hundreds of millions of dollars of attempted fraud a year. And some of the same criminals who like to hang out on the dark web also like to sell stolen credit card numbers, and they perpetrate a lot of their fraud, or they attempt account takeovers on the phone and things like that. Um, so that's where I was for 5 years. For the first half of the time, I was working at Capital One on what I would call the customer service side of the company. So helping make the customer service side of the company more efficient, phone call centers, customer service agents, quality control, auditing. But then I pivoted in the second half of my time at Capital One to model risk management. So for all of the models and AI systems running in Capital One at the time, turning those or making sure that we were governing them. And I spent a lot of time focusing on the technical risk associated with AI. So things like where you build an engineering system and you're operating it at scale, what kind of things go wrong there that you need to manage to prevent those from impacting customers or the company. And then 3 years ago, I made the career change once more to e-discovery and legal technology. And so I joined Relativity uh, on the recommendation of a colleague who was in the field. Uh, she was a VP of research at a very large uh, company that provides research services in legal technology, and she said, "Well, you have an opportunity to go join Relativity. That's going to be a great place to go. It's a very exciting time to be in law right now, and your skills are a perfect match for where the industry needs to go." And so it was very lucky for me to join, and obviously it's been a very exciting 3 years since I got here.
So interesting. You and I have a lot of overlap. So I was a computer engineer. I started off doing basic programming in the early '80s on a TI 99 4A. Graduated to a Commodore 64, then a 286, and started with Visual Basic. Did a lot of SQL programming. So I was actually on the SQL team at Microsoft, which is kind of how all this got started. Have an undergrad in math and an MBA, and I spent 10 years in financial services at Bank of America and anti-money laundering. So I started off in kind of the second line of defense. I think you and I might have joked about the different lines of defense in financial services. You have the first line of defense, which is the line of business, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
consumer bank, wealth management, what have you. The second line of defense are your compliance partners. Third line of defense is internal audit. And then the fourth line of defense is the Wall Street Journal, because that's where you're going to end up when you have a breach and the regulators come in. So I worked in AML on the compliance side, and then moved into internal audit and evaluated AML controls in the different lines of business. And it was extremely fascinating. I got to put a lot of my math and statistics and data skills to work. And this is late 2000s. I left in, I don't know, somewhere around that time. But so this was post um, uh, the post Patriot Act, when, after 9/11, AML risk became one of the top priorities for financial institutions, and they threw a lot of resources at it. So I was there in the very early days. I'm sure there's a ton of really, really interesting stuff and ways they're applying AI to that work that just wasn't happening in my neck of the woods anyway. So it's an interesting career path for sure. So you and I started last time we chatted just to, like, the origins of AI in legal, right? AI has been around a lot longer than November 2022 when Chat GPT hit the streets, but especially in e-discovery. So, like, what is your perspective on AI's role? Kind of pre Chat GPT, and I assume relativity was a pioneer in that space.
Yeah. So anytime I talk about AI, I feel like the inner lawyer in me comes out. I'm like, well, what do you mean by AI, and how are we going to define it? And we're fortunate that we seem to be arriving at a fairly common definition of AI, at least The OECD put out a definition that I think was largely inspired by other definitions that had come before from things like model risk offices and other sort of controls around models and also sort of these early definitions of AI. But let's agree on one to start with for the rest of the podcast, and we'll say that it's a machine based system that can make predictions, recommendations, or decisions that influence real or virtual environments. And there are these additional qualifiers, right? They can vary in their level of autonomy, which is the degree to which they can learn or act without human involvement. And we'll hold to that one because that's actually quite important. Is that AI systems vary in their levels of autonomy. But then coming back to hey, AI and e-discovery, or kind of like in the practice of law itself, I think that most people would agree that some of the earliest starts to the use of AI in law were in discovery and in technology assisted review or sort of the art of predictive coding, where you have a series of documents, you need to review them, you need to decide which of them are responsive to a matter or relevant to a request, and you don't look at all of them. And of course, there were techniques that were using computers that predated predictive coding. So, for example, Boolean search was sort of this dominant approach where, and Boolean search is still used today for the production of documents. But some of the concerns around Boolean search is that it can be over-inclusive, and sometimes it can also miss things because you sort of didn't jam enough search terms into your massive list of potential things that you were looking for, or variations or misspellings of somebody's name. And so Tar is an improvement on Boolean search in the sense that, first of all, it's adaptive. It allows you to, in some sense, update your assumptions of what you're looking for based on what you've found already. And you can do that, of course, with Boolean search. But Tar is a process that, in some sense, semi-automates that. It also, in some sense, performs a form of ranking, which is to say, I am more or less confident that this document is responsive to what I'm looking for. And once you have ranking in your model, that ranking or scoring allows you to sort of take more precise cuts and say, well, I want documents that are 75% or more on some kind of score threshold. And then when you do your evaluations, you can come to some statistical certainty around how many of the documents you found and how many you're unfortunately going to be leaving behind. So I would say that's kind of where things started. Certainly, Relativity has an active learning product. It supports tar1 and tar2 workflows, and from an AI perspective, there are a lot of other related technologies that sort of appeared around the same time, heavily influenced by other developments in natural language processing and information retrieval at the time. But LSI is, of course, a capability within Relativity has been very helpful and allows you to do things like topic clustering. There's a facet which is interesting, which is you have these systems that are sort of in between AI and not AI. So if you have something like email threading, there are ways to accomplish email threading with what most people would call a rules-based system. It's like, hey, I find this and this situation occurs. Okay, that's going to be an email thread. By the OECD definition of AI, that's still technically AI, but it starts becoming less. It's almost like at the time it was probably considered AI, or people would probably consider it analytics. And then as the technology gets older and older, people get comfortable with it. They know what it can and can't do, and it stops being this new thing, and it stops being AI, and it just starts being the button you click, like a spell check or an autocorrect.
Interesting. And I think we're in a really interesting time. I think with the paradigm, the current paradigm of AI and its transformational effects on the legal industry. I think that there was a tremendous amount of excitement, fear, uncertainty, and doubt when the Goldman report came out and estimated that 44% of legal tasks could be automated by AI. I'd be really curious to I think that was a very optimistic perspective, especially based on, we have seen the Stanford paper, for example. I did an entire podcast on it maybe 2 months ago that highlighted a lot of limitations, especially in the legal research field, where current systems struggle with a number of concepts, and they document them categorically. AI misunderstands holdings. It has trouble distinguishing between legal actors. It has trouble respecting order of authority, and sometimes just plain fabricates. So, what is your perspective? Do you feel like in the early days after ChatGPT, there was an excess of optimism about at least in the near term, the transformational effects, or do you feel we're we're about where we need to be from that perspective?
That's an interesting question. So, um, there are a couple of different uses for AI in legal work, and I think people have sort of started with legal research. It was so close to existing technologies that were starting to get well proven and understood. I mean, retrieval augmented generation was a sort of research area of research before ChatGPT and GPT-4 came out, and the the results for sort of testing retrieval augmented generation versus search are always quite impressive. Um, you can take very naive retrieval augmented generation systems and plug them in to databases of documents and type in natural language questions and get answers that far exceed our expectations of the quality of a search system. And um, and that's true for a variety of reasons. But coming back to, well, are we on the right pace? Are we too enthusiastic? Are we not? I am not a lawyer, so I can't speak for how much lawyers find themselves transformed. Um, but I find that so much of again, there's a difference between replace and transform. So I find that so much of my work has been transformed by opportunity and access to these types of AI tools. And I'm going to find it very surprising if the rest of the world doesn't eventually catch up. But I also expect that it is going to continue to take some time. And I think that the biggest obstacle is not the capabilities of the technologies themselves. The biggest obstacles are actually our own ability to understand the systems and on the development side to make systems that are easy to modify and manage AI services that leverage these components that match user expectations, and then for users to understand what these systems can do, and then to map their own and manage their own workflows in a way that take advantage of these systems. Because time and again, I think one of the things that everybody is guilty of trying to do is to use these systems to replace existing processes and to do things in exactly the same way that they would do. Like one of the most common metaphors that I hear is, oh, it's like an intern or it's like a graduate student. And it's like, no, this thing is nothing like an intern or a graduate student. An intern or a graduate student cannot read thousands of pages of a document and summarize all of them in minutes. That's something else, right? And so coming back, we have all of these metaphors, and we have to adapt and grow new metaphors, grow new understanding. Where are we? We're on pace. I think we're ahead of pace, right? I was definitely afraid that this technology would come out and it would be a year later, and everybody would be so terrified to use it that we would have no advances, that we wouldn't happen. But what I think has happened is there's been a critical mass of innovators all across law, plaintiffs, defendants, judges, regulators, and they're like, this thing has potential. And so even if it's 1 in 100 people, and I think it's more than that, I think it's like 1 in 10, and they're really leaning in and they're really trying to understand and they're experimenting and they're like staying up late at night and they're having conversations with their chatbot and they're trying to use it to write their novel. They're asking it for advice on their relationships. All of these things give us more understanding of what it can do, what it can't do. I mean, somebody posted online that they had just finished a computer science course, right? and that they were doing it at night. And I'm sure that they were getting some help from AI as part of that, because it allows you to do more things. And so this transformation, it's less about the technology and it's more about ourselves. And I know that's a little cliche, but it really is about how we adapt to these new technologies that we've invented than it is about the technologies themselves.
Yeah, I think the Gartner hype curve is a incredible metaphor that has accurately demonstrated how things play out, and I think it's true here also. So when 3.5 came out and scored, I don't know, low mid 60s on the bar, and then 4.0 came out and scored over 90 percentile, right? So scored better than 90% of um, um, people taking the test. I think
I will. I'll just interrupt you real fast.
yeah.
That 90% percentile was actually retracted by the study's authors in a follow up. So a really good paper came out a couple months later from a graduate student at MIT who sort of issued some of the qualifiers. Like among them, it wasn't being evaluated against first time test takers. It was actually being evaluated against repeat test takers. There was sort of some regrading that they did. And I think that the where GPT-4 landed was sort of in the 60 to 70% on the bar exam. I don't think we've seen any testing, or I am not aware of any testing of Turbo or Omni or O1. But I actually suspect that the model probably is up there at this point. Is probably up in the 90% if you take the most recent models. But at the time, those results were slightly hyped, and I think that even the study authors would fairly say that they got a couple of things wrong that slightly overstated the effectiveness of the model.
Yeah, and I think that demonstrates the trend I'm describing, which is I think there was a lot of optimism, and I think this has been attributed to Bill Gates, that people overestimate what you can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what you can accomplish in 10 years. I think that dynamic holds true here as well. There's very few people who would argue the transformative impact that it's gonna have on the industry long term, but what does that timeline look like? I think that's I'm a little more pessimistic in terms of when value is going to be delivered, a positive ROI. Like I see things like Copilot, and Microsoft's Copilot I'm not a fan of at right now. I think it's got huge amounts of limitations. I think pricing wise it's way more expensive than it should be. And I think Microsoft's actually watering down expectations. There was an article, Benioff from Salesforce called it Clippy 2.0. Now he's got an agenda, right? There's some sour grapes in there somewhere, but I think that even Microsoft, and they've been a huge investor of OpenAI. I've also read, and this is speculation, that they're throttling to manage token consumption, and yeah, I just think that we're getting ahead of our skis a little bit, and I don't want that to translate to Ted's bearish on AI and legal. I'm not. I just think that it's going to take more time to really have the transformational effect than I think our current state thinking really gives it credit for.
Uh, I think if you had spent 10 years hanging out with me, you would know this already about me, but you're gonna just have to take it from maybe like a short anecdote for me. I went out with the entire model risk management team, people who are experienced model risk managers. They study risk, and they do it every day of their lives. We went to a go-kart racing course, and I was the slowest driver on the track. So I am one of the most risk averse people that you know among risk professionals. So I'm very risk averse, and when uh, the GPT-3 class of models was released, I was like, man, these things are slow. They're not very smart. They OpenAI is talking about all this like AI safety stuff and alignment, and I'm like, I don't get it. Why would I care? And then GPT-4 came out, and we were very curious. We weren't optimistic yet, but we were just sort of thinking, well, what if? Because we realized that if it was true that these systems were in the 90%, that was the hypothesis we were all operating on. Yet I hadn't read the MIT paper, but if it were true that these systems could operate with that level of efficiency, that they would be very transformative very early. And so we started performing these tests, and those tests became what we were calling internally the GPT project. And then I will say, without providing too many details, that very shortly before we announced it in Relativity Fest last year, we named it Air for Review, and I'm very happy with the name. But it only went into sort of, it was in very, very limited, basically proof of concept testing through the end of the year that year. And at the beginning of this year, we put it into a limited release where we had a few select group of customers that had access to it in January. And we started aggressively testing with them up to several very large matters in Q2 and Q3. And we had a customer, again, all of this was in limited testing. We didn't release it to everybody. We only started to release it internationally at the end of the limited release period. And we had a customer come on stage at Relativity Fest, or effectively for our recording, say that her firm had saved over $1 million in a review using Air for Review, the limited product. And so $1 million on a single matter in its limited trial phase, and that was just one of many cases that we ran through this past year, and now in full release, and customers using it every day. I do think that we've kind of crossed that threshold of, hey, can this thing prove value? Now, is every AI system, is every investment, is every task going to be sort of transformed at that level? Probably not, or probably not soon. But have some tasks already been massively transformed in a very short period of time? And I would say 18 months from the release of GPT-4 is a very short period of time. Yes. And so I suspect what we're going to see in 2025 is even more acceleration here. I won't comment on Microsoft Copilot, except to say that Microsoft is not treating this as a 1-year investment and creating a small clippy help pot. I think that Microsoft is treating this as an all-in play for them. And for a lot of the ways that they act, a lot of the investments they're making into their products, they truly are trying to transform their whole cloud suite of products and capabilities by integrating this across their stack. And I would say the sharpest evidence for this is the sort of investment in power plants being made by these large cloud providers, and sort of the reintroduction of nuclear energy, or the building and operation of nuclear energy in the U.S. To sort of meet the demand that's coming for all of these AI capabilities.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear some tangible real life case studies. There was an article by Forrester recently that talked about Copilot efficiencies and some of the numbers that they threw out there. I'm skeptical of a lot of these numbers. Now, this one, for example, this study cited up to 350% projected ROI, and with Copilot today, and which is significant, especially if you're deploying it enterprise wide. I think there are pockets within an organization, and honestly, business of law use cases I think are very compelling for a product like Copilot once it gets its act together. Like today, there's just really fundamental limitations, like drafting with Copilot. Copilot doesn't learn your voice. It has access to massive troves of examples of your writing, but it doesn't remember that. It requires you to upload a style document every time you draft if you want to use your own voice with examples. That's a fundamental issue they have. ChatGPT's already solved that. And I know Microsoft will get it right. It's just right now I hear numbers thrown around like that. I hear, the ILTA survey, tech survey this year said that law firms over 700 attorneys, 74% are using AI in business use cases. That sounds very aspirational to me based on observation. The number goes down dramatically. Under 50 attorneys, it's 20%, which that was kind of surprising. I thought smaller law shops would be a little more experimental. Just look at cloud. They were way ahead of big law. Big law is just getting to the cloud in earnest, right? Like the last 3 years have law firms big law really moved to M365. So yeah, this seems aspirational to me. That's why I'm a little skeptical of the numbers that I hear thrown around. But I'm a skeptic by nature. To your point about risk aversion, I tend to. I live in Missouri. It's the show me state, right?
That's right. It's actually one of the internal principles of my team is that we're not from Missouri, but we're from Missouri in spirit, and so all claims have to be backed by data.
Yeah, we used to use that line in internal audit quite a bit. Oh, you've got the controls in place. Okay, show me. Well, let's talk about agentic AI because that was the topic I wanted to touch on. Let's start with a definition there because I see people building workflows in Power Automate and calling it agentic AI. And how do you define agentic AI?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question because there's a lot of parallels between things like we think of like workflow automation, robotic process automation, all of these sort of existing things that we've had where maybe 20 or 30 years ago somebody would say, oh, that's a Unix shell script, or that's a Perl script, or that's a Python script, or that's a makefile, or now a word you hear all the time sort of in software engineering is a pipeline. A pipeline is a process for clicking a button and something happens. Typically, I'm taking code that I've written on my computer and I am sending it into our production environment, maybe through a series of gates and steps and processes that control it and then keep it from sort of automatically influencing. I think that there's a pretty easy way to define agentic AI, and that is agentic AI takes on a greater amount of autonomy than sort of previous or other types of AI. So agentic AI is AI with greater autonomy. It acts with, in some sense, less supervision or less direct supervision. There's another aspect I think that is common with agentic AI, and that's that there's some aspect of reasoning and planning, which is to say that I ask the agent to do something, and the agent will break that down into a series of tasks instead of sort of following sort of a predefined route that it goes through every single time. Is some process that has existed for 10 years agentic AI? There probably are some out there. Somebody probably has designed an automation system that takes in a very general query and then dispatches that out to some sort of request that comes back or does a workflow. Maybe something that you set up on Siri that follows a 5-step process, but then checks to see if your house is locked. Maybe that's an agent. I'll wait for OECD or Congress or somebody to come up with a more formal definition. But those are the two that I rely on the most, which is autonomy and then some level of planning. And then there are a couple of things that we commonly associate with it. I think, for example, interaction with APIs, or potentially like interacting like, with Claude, it's sort of dragging your mouse around and clicking and typing things in for you. And then sometimes adaptive learning, so like it's improving itself as it goes. And then like another sort of very common facet that people will sort of request or sort of think is appropriate is some level of human supervision, where there are places where a human will come in and interact with the system, sort of not at the start or the end, but possibly in between, and sort of like intermediate stages and steps.
Interesting. Is agentic AI important in legal now? And if so, why?
I think that agentic AI is certainly going to be a very important aspect of legal in the future. I'm gonna steal something from one of the discussions on my team, where we were talking about what the impact of agents is going to be, and we started thinking about different categories of agents. We said, well, there's going to be kind of like a grunt agent, and they're going to do the most monotonous of tasks. Like they're going to go through every document and identify the entities, or they're going to do no insult to anybody who does document review, but it's a very drudgerous task, like going through documents and pulling information out. And so there are going to be agents that operate at that level, and then there are going to be agents above them, and those are going to be sort of, let's say, supervising agents. And then my team, they're like, well, and there's going to be executive agents, and they're going to play golf on Fridays. And I said, well, maybe. So,
Nice.
but yes, we're gonna see. I think we're gonna see hierarchical structures, and sorry, I'm getting all the way into the prediction. In terms of like, hey, today, are there agent systems out there? There are certainly agents that I think I'm aware of that are commercially available. I personally haven't evaluated any of them. Are some of the tools that we build, like Air for Review, are those agents? I'm not there yet. I think that they have scale and they operate under weak supervision. The systems that we have right now within relativity do not have sort of a very complicated planning step. So if you have a commercially available system, it's sort of taking the same path every single time. Now, are we planning on building systems that are more dynamic? Absolutely. And are they going to be even more powerful and effective and transformative? I think absolutely. I don't think that there's any doubt that agent systems are going to be an incredibly important facet. I think for now I'm in the curiosity phase of trying to figure out where we'll have the most impact with them, and where they're going to be most useful for attorneys and lawyers.
You're agentic curious.
I am agentic curious. That's correct.
So
But I don't aspire to build any golf playing agents. I hope I can do something better than that.
yeah, maybe book your tea time. That might be cool. Well, we demo. So we have InfoDash is an legal intranet extranet platform, and our kind of special sauce is really our integration layer. So we deploy an API, usually in Azure, that facilitates all of the information flow. So we have integrations with all the back office systems, PMS, experience management, document management, just about everything that a law firm uses. And once we deploy it, you're then able to take kind of off the shelf tools like Power Automate and build workflows. Like we have a new integration with Big Hand Business Intelligence. And so we tap into their data cube and we can set up thresholds where we say, hey, anytime an attorney accrues more than $100,000 in AR 30 days past due, take these steps. And then, we incorporate some AI in there, but it doesn't help navigate the decision tree. What we do is we take the output of that, which is tabular, and have make a call in Azure OpenAI, format it, put links to the source systems. So I would not call that agentic, because it's AI assisted workflow is what I would classify that as. If the AI is helping navigate the decision tree, I think you got a case for being agentic.
I don't think it's far.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna see some climbing of the abstraction ladder, where you might have 1 or 200 of these systems, and then you have a system that's sort of reviewing their outputs on a daily basis, and then summarizing them and providing them to stakeholders. We're eventually definitely going to be seeing more of that. Now, is that an agent? I think maybe not, but as soon as it has some level of authority to take an action that you've delegated to it, that is more than just information gathering, but again, maybe even just choosing which information goes in front of the executive team every morning. Is that an agent? Well, I'm starting to lean into, on the spectrum of not an agent to agent. That's starting to cross over the median line for me.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point. It's probably a spectrum. It's maybe not a binary scenario. There's probably shades of gray. Well, you mentioned tapping into data. Like, the way I think about agentic AI, it requires robust data inputs, and law firms are notoriously bad at data management. They're getting better, like I would say, but very recently, like in the last 3 years, um, I've seen service providers with dedicated practices around helping firms stand up data lakes and with data management. So they are slowly getting better, but I don't know how big of it's going to take a long time for firms to really get things to a place. I think, I don't know. Is that your perspective where agents can really be deployed in full capacity?
I think so. This is interesting. First of all, it's a great question, and I think that I'm not going to answer it, which is always the least friendly thing to do on an interview. But I'm gonna change the question a little bit, and I'm gonna answer that question. And um, what you asked was, will well, I think you stated as an assumption that if you have bad data, you will not be able to run AI, or you won't be able to
Agents.
leverage AI or agents or any. And I actually don't think that's true. I actually think that one of the first roles of agents and AI systems is going to be organizing the worst parts of your data and helping you understand where you've got a messy garden and helping you curate and clean it and identify what you need and identify what you don't. So, or help you get comfortable with the state of this very messy and unorganized garden and elevating and organizing and building organization and indexes into the things that you need so that you don't have to worry or that your governance is of higher quality and better regulated. So will the agents work better on higher quality data? 100%, absolutely. Will we build agents to go look at the horrible data and help clean it up and fix it for us? 100%. And again, I think about the world of discovery. I don't want to say that 99% of the data that flows through a modern e-discovery platform is junk, but it's certainly not usually relevant or responsive to what people are actually looking for. I get told again and again and again that there's usually only 5 documents in the entire 50 million emails that actually ever make it to the witnesses or to the jury. Now maybe it's not, maybe it's more than 5, but it's probably not more than a couple thousand. And so if we think about the role of the agent, the thing that will, in some sense, at least from my world, be the most important is the ability to evaluate something and say, hey, is this important or is this useful to this context or is it not? And that will be a very important job because that's the thing that these systems are the best at. They're the best at scale. If I trust this thing's reasoning over any document that it can sort of look at, then I can have it reason over a million documents for me in the time that it takes me to go, well, a little bit more than a cup of coffee, but maybe a very long breakfast, right? Like a shakshuka. Something, right? But we're in a world where these systems are um, tremendously powerful, right? They aren't necessarily fully capable in terms of what they can and can't do. But that gap I think is being closed quite quickly, and I think the data story is actually going to be the story that's the most interesting, right? Maybe in 10 years, again, 1 year predictions, 10 year predictions. Maybe in 10 years prediction, the idea of having messy corporate data will be the sort of most people will be like, oh, it's like a telephone. Who has a telephone line in their home anymore? Everybody uses cell phones. Who keeps messy, unorganized data when you can have, the enterprise AI cleaner agents come in and every single book is organized by title, by author. The ones that you haven't read in 10 years are pulled off the shelf and automatically sold. I think we're potentially going to see a level of data understanding and data management that we don't really consider right now because it's just too expensive. But that cost will go away and the capability will come.
Interesting. Yeah, like when I think about like a law firm DM corpus, you've got, if you're AmLaw 50, you have maybe 100 million documents. You definitely north of 50 million. And thinking about like the resources required to, and you've got everything in there. You've got emails, you've got drafts, you've got, unused versions of, and thinking about, and very little metadata, right? Like lawyers are notoriously bad for profiling documents in the DMS. And there's been so much M&A in the industry that you've got one mess that gets slammed into another mess when they merge their document management system. Sometimes that happens 3, 4, 5 times over. And, I think about that. It seems like I think you're going to need a nuclear power plant to fuel the data center that's going to clean that up, is what it feels like. But I'm sure it's going to get more efficient. And that sounds like it's what you're saying.
Yeah. The only thing I can kind of compare it to is my own world, where people regularly load terabytes of data into Relativity One, and now we have AI systems that will very happily read every single one of those millions of documents for you and help you identify which one is responsive and not. And if we can do that for a discovery case, there are going to be a whole lot of other use cases in law for organizing information. And again, internal knowledge stores. I think there are some. I won't say who, but I will say that I believe that there are law firms out there that are already thinking about this and already figuring out how they can leverage technology even more and these AI systems even more. And so if you're on the cloud, if you already know how to operate these AI systems, or you've got good relationships with these service providers that have these kinds of capabilities, then I think we are going to see some really interesting transformations in directions that I don't think either you and I are not anticipating in the next couple of years.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, no doubt. I mean, this is a really, really exciting time. I've been in the industry for 16 years, and by far, this is the most fun I've had. So, well, we're about out of time. There was a whole section of our agenda that we didn't get to, but maybe we can have you back down the road. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I could sit here all day and talk shop with you. But I really appreciate you joining. And like, how can people connect with you, find out more about the things? I think you got it. LinkedIn is obviously a great way, but any information you want to provide around that?
Yeah, I'm Aron Ahmadia on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Aron Ahmadia out there in the world right now, but maybe there'll be more in the future. But yeah, Aron Ahmadia on LinkedIn is the best place to find me. Shoot me a message, or you can email me, aaron.ahmadia@relativity.com. That gets to me with any questions you have about anything we discussed on the podcast or anything in Relativity's offerings.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining, and enjoy the weekend, and we'll chat again soon.
Thanks so much, Ted.
All
Have
right.
a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.